From Stockholm, Sweden, this is Democracy Now!
We have gone from the United States government's war on whistleblowers to now a war on journalism with the indictment of Julian Assange for what even the government itself admits was work related to journalism. And this, I think, is a dangerous, dangerous thing.
World-famous NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden warns of a growing war on journalism at last night's Right Livelihood Awards here in Stockholm, Sweden, more than 6 years after sharing documents with journalists revealing how the United States has built a system of mass surveillance to look up every phone call, text, and email of every person on Earth. Snowden joined the awards ceremony via video stream from Moscow, Russia, where he's lived in political exile since 2013. Then we hear from another Right Livelihood Award winner, this year's Aminata Haidar. She's resisted the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara for more than 3 decades.
Let's
put an end to this injustice. Let's give a voice to Sahrawi people. Let them choose their future.
Then, as Medicare for all and free college have become key issues of the U.S. 2020 presidential race, we'll look at Sweden's thriving welfare state, which is supported by both the country's liberals and conservatives. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Stockholm, Sweden. The House Judiciary Committee held an 8.5-hour televised impeachment hearing on Wednesday featuring 4 law experts speaking about the constitutional nature of impeachment. The hearing opened a second phase of the impeachment inquiry into how President Trump withheld military aid from Ukraine in order to pressure the Ukrainian president to investigate his political rivals, the Bidens. On Wednesday, legal experts debated whether this conduct met the constitutional definition of impeachment. 3 constitutional scholars invited to testify by the Democrats said his conduct was a textbook example of an impeachable offense. This is University of North Carolina law professor Michael Gerhardt.
If what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. This is precisely the misconduct that the framers created a constitution, including impeachment, to protect against.
The one constitutional scholar invited by the Republicans disputed that Trump's actions were sufficient grounds for impeachment. This is George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley.
I'm concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is slated to give a public statement about the status of the House impeachment inquiry today at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. California Republican Congressmember Devin Nunes has sued CNN for over $400 million after CNN published a story detailing how Nunes, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, traveled to Vienna and met with a former Ukrainian prosecutor to discuss digging up dirt on the Bidens last year. Nunes claims this report is false. CNN had repeatedly asked Nunes to comment on the story before it was published, but he refused to do so. The report implicates Nunes in the Trump administration's broader effort to pressure Ukraine to investigate Trump's political rivals, the Bidens, which is the center of the ongoing impeachment inquiry. In London, President Donald Trump abruptly canceled a scheduled news conference and left the NATO summit early after a video went viral showing other world leaders mocking him. In the video, which has been viewed millions of times, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte and others are seen smiling and laughing as they appear to discuss Trump's lengthy press conference and how even his closest officials are often surprised by Trump's seemingly erratic behavior. The private conversation was caught on a hot mic, then posted online by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. A new analysis says global greenhouse gas emissions are projected to hit a record high in 2019. It's the latest study to highlight the world's failure to take the dramatic action needed to avert the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. The analysis comes amidst the opening week of the UN Climate Summit in Madrid, Spain, known as COP25. Among the sponsors of this year's summit is Endesa, Spain's biggest corporate greenhouse gas polluter. The electric utility provider emits about 60 million tons of carbon each year. The company has received an exhibition space inside the conference in exchange for $2.2 million in sponsorship money. Democracy Now! Will be broadcasting live from COP25 beginning tomorrow, that's Friday, and all next week. Tune in. In Colombia, tens of thousands of people poured into the streets across Colombia Wednesday for a third national strike in just 2 weeks. The demonstrations began as a protest against corruption, economic inequality, and the killing of indigenous and community leaders. Many are now calling for the ouster of President Iván Duque's right-wing government. This is Connie Camelo in the streets of Bogotá.
In my life, I never have seen a march of this magnitude in Colombia, from students, indigenous people, trade union organizations, people from the health system, environmentalists. I think there is a national outcry, and I think that is evident in this moment. And 14 days later, to see this square filled with people.
In France, workers across the country are on strike today as a protest against French President Emmanuel Macron's pension plan. The strikes have paralyzed transport in the capital, Paris, and other major French cities, but residents whose commutes have been disrupted are still expressing support for the strike.
The strike is really for our pensions, and I think we still need to fight for it, even more so as I'm a civil servant and we're pretty much impacted.
In Spain, a hand grenade was thrown over the walls of a migrant children's shelter in the capital, Madrid, in the latest attack against the young, unaccompanied migrants. The grenade did not explode until the bomb squad carried out a controlled explosion, and no injuries have been reported. Right-wing politicians have repeatedly criticized the shelter, and a mob attacked some of the shelter's children with clubs last month. In India, a 23-year-old rape survivor was assaulted and set on fire by her alleged rapist while she was on her way to her court hearing in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. The 2 alleged rapists and 3 other men have been arrested on suspicion of setting her on fire. She'd filed a lawsuit against the 2 men in March. She's now in the hospital in critical condition. The attack comes less than 2 weeks after India was rocked by another case in the southern city of Hyderabad, in which a 27-year-old woman was raped and set on fire, sparking widespread protests against violence against women in India. In Afghanistan, gunmen killed the head of a Japanese aid agency and 5 other people Wednesday in an attack in the eastern city of Jalalabad. Tetsu Nakamura was the head of the aid agency Peace Japan Medical Services. He had recently received honorary Afghan citizenship for his decades of humanitarian work in Afghanistan. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The Taliban spokesperson said the Afghan Taliban was not involved. Attorney General William Barr is threatening communities who are critical of police brutality, saying they have to be more deferential to the police or risk losing police presence in their neighborhoods entirely. Barr's comments at a Washington, D.C. awards ceremony for policing sparked immediate criticism. Vanita Gupta, a former head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, said, quote, "The idea that the Attorney General of the United States, the nation's chief law enforcement officer, is recommending abandoning communities as retribution for pushing for police reform or criticizing policing practices is profoundly dangerous and irresponsible," she said. Florida neighborhood watch vigilante George Zimmerman has filed a $100 million lawsuit against the family of Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old unarmed African-American teenager Zimmerman shot and killed in 2012. Zimmerman killed Martin while the unarmed teenager was returning from a neighborhood store with Skittles and a drink. Zimmerman was acquitted of homicide charges in 2013. His acquittal sparked nationwide protests over violence against African-American teenagers at the hands of police and vigilantes. Zimmerman has now sued Trayvon Martin's parents, their lawyer, various members of the prosecution, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for defamation and, quote, malicious prosecution. In Arizona, the Tucson City Council has voted unanimously to join Pima County in taking part in a lawsuit aimed at halting the construction of Trump's border wall in 3 sensitive environmental areas: the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, and the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area. The Trump administration waived a slew of environmental laws in order to speed up construction in the protected areas, which are also sacred lands to Tohono O'odham people and other indigenous communities. And at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, students are calling on the university to reverse its decision to deny tenure to Lorgia Garcia-Pena, who had been the only Latina in a tenure-track position at Harvard. On Monday, dozens of Harvard students held a sit-in at University Hall in support of Garcia-Pena and to demand Harvard create a dedicated ethnic studies department. Over 3,000 students have signed a petition calling on Harvard to reverse its decision and offer Garcia-Pena tenure. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, broadcasting from Stockholm, Sweden. The Right Livelihood Awards celebrated their 40th anniversary last night at the historic Circus Arena in Stockholm, Sweden, where more than 1,000 people gathered to celebrate this year's 4 laureates: Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, Chinese women's rights lawyer Guo Jianmai, Brazilian indigenous leader Davi Kapanawa and the Yanomami Hutukara Association he helped form, and the Sahrawi human rights leader Aminatou Haidar, who has challenged the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara for decades. The Right Livelihood Award is known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. Over the past 4 decades, it's been given to grassroots leaders and activists around the globe, among them the world-famous NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, who won the award 5 years ago. In 2013, Ed Snowden shared a trove of secret documents about how the United States revealed the government was pursuing the means to collect every single phone call, text message, and email in an unprecedented system of global mass surveillance. After sharing the documents with reporters, Snowden was charged in the U.S. for violating the Espionage Act and other laws. As he fled Hong Kong, attempting to get political exile in Latin America, Snowden became stranded in transit in the Moscow, Russia airport after the U.S. revoked his passport. He has lived in political exile in Moscow, Russia ever since. Last night, I interviewed Ed Snowden during the Right Livelihood Awards ceremony here in Stockholm in front of a live audience of 1,000. He spoke via video from Moscow, where he's lived in exile since 2013. Ed, it was something like 6 years ago that this young 29-year-old computer geek, NSA contractor, decided to change his life. That young man was you. You were in Hawaii, an NSA subcontractor. Explain why you made the decision you did to turn what seemed like an idyllic life upside down and leave your country, the United States.
It was not an easy decision. It's one I think anyone would rather avoid. But there's a question that we all face when we come into contact with things that call into question our deepest beliefs. I was always very much an agent of government long before I worked for them, because I believed everything that I heard and everything that I read from official sources, because to me it seemed that they had no reason to lie to us. But through my time in government, as I moved to more and more senior positions and worked more closely with each of the systems, I began to see more evidence that the private truths of what government was actually doing these things were very different than the publicly presented versions of it. And nowhere was this more clear than in what I witnessed in the creation of the system of global mass surveillance. This is a system that I wrote eventually in that year to a journalist by the name of Laura Poitras. Was totally indiscriminate and far beyond even the very loose restrictions of American law and, I think, international standards that we've come to accept regarding surveillance. This was a new system that saw everything that you did and did not care or bear any regard whatsoever to the difference between those suspected of crimes and those who had done nothing wrong. This is a system, the first system in history, that bore witness to everything, every border you cross, every purchase you make, every call you dial, every cell phone tower you pass, friend you keep, article you write, site you visit, and subject line you type, was now in the hands of a system whose reach is unlimited, but whose safeguards were not. And I felt, despite what the law said, that this was something that the public ought to know.
So tonight, and as you can hear here in the auditorium in Stockholm, and if we could hear that applause around the world, it would be thunderous. People are deeply concerned about what you reveal to the world. Two of the journalists won Pulitzer Prizes for working on that with you, receiving the information and putting it out to the world, Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. But now, you cannot go back to your own country, though you are hailed as a hero by so many. 5 years ago, the Right Livelihood Foundation worked hard for you to come to Sweden. Until this day, not a single European government has come forward to offer you protection against extradition to the United States. Can you explain what you face in the United States, what you've been charged with, and what that means to you?
Well, there's certainly no question by any legal expert or even political opinion maker that what I face in the United States is an extraordinary process of what I believe internationally is well recognized as persecution rather than prosecution. The potential sentence and the likely sentence for telling the truth, which the government does not contest is what happened here, is that I would die in prison. And yet, despite that, and despite the threats that those in Europe who have offered me support in government have faced when they have tried to cross that line and officially protect me, which I think is something that we all regret and we would like to see change in the future. When we look at that dynamic, when we look at this current status quo, the fear that consumes even the allies of the people and government of the United States, when it comes to standing for protecting people who tell the truth. I think everyone who looks at this realizes this is an extraordinary moment in our history. One of the core pillars of the modern system of the world, the institutional standards and structures that the United States itself designed, it is now actively working to oppose so long as those institutions insulate their critics. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. And this is the thing. It's not about me. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I've done my part. I've said my piece. I could be the best person on earth. I could be the worst person in history. And it's not going to make a difference to your tomorrow. But what will is if people can tell the truth to the public about the most material facts and programs and policies that affect our lives every day.
You currently have Julian Assange at a maximum security prison in England, facing 175 years for espionage in the United States. You have Chelsea Manning back in jail in the United States. You concerned that you won't face a fair trial in the United States. Can you respond in all of these cases? You are all among the most famous whistleblowers in the world.
Yeah, when you look at my case and the Manning case before me, when you look at the Ellsberg case going all the way back to the 1970s, they're all derived from the same law under which Julian Assange, who, it should be clear, owes no allegiance to the United States. He's not a U.S. citizen. He's simply a publisher working in news. They've been charged under this Espionage Act. This is a special law that absolutely rules out any kind of fair trial. Going back to the 1970s, when Ellsberg tried to tell the jury why he did what he did, his lawyer asked him, Mr. Ellsberg, why did you copy the Pentagon Papers, which was the secret history of the U.S.'s true involvement in the Vietnam War? The prosecutor for the government said, objection. This is not something the jury is allowed to hear. And the judge agreed with it. He silenced Ellsberg, and he silenced our ability to hear why these things were done, and for the jury to consider not only was this legal, but was it moral? And this, I think, is the sad history of the United States government's relationship to the press in the last decade. They have been more and more concerned with what is legal than what is moral. And what began with Ellsberg is an extraordinary case against a lone individual which challenged the government's involvement in the war, was challenged by a new generation of whistleblower like Chelsea Manning, who revealed torture and war crimes, indefinite detention on the part of the United States government in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. My own involvement in the revelation of global mass surveillance. And in every case, we were charged under this same law that forbids the jury to consider if this was something that did more good for the public to know than it did harm to the government in terms of inconvenience or theoretical risks of investigative journalism in a free society. And this is where we get to this crucial part in the story. We moved from an individual and exceptional case that was not repeated for decades and decades in the Ellsberg instance to something that under the Obama administration, he charged more sources of journalism using this special law than all other presidents in the United States, history of the United States combined. And now, under the Trump administration, we have taken one more step. We have gone from the United States government's war on whistleblowers to now a war on journalism with the indictment of Julian Assange for what even the government itself admits was work related to journalism. And this, I think, is a dangerous, dangerous thing, not just for us, not just for Julian Assange, but for the world and the future. If we allow developed democracies to imprison their political critics and dissidents, to people who call into question the legality, the propriety, the morality of their policies and the prosecution of their wars, we will embolden the most authoritarian regimes on earth. And we will be the ones who our children question when they ask how the world that they were inheriting came to be.
That's 2014 Right Livelihood laureate and NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden speaking from Moscow at last night's Right Livelihood Awards here in Stockholm, Sweden. He couldn't join us because he's in political exile there as he faces espionage charges in the United States. Coming up, we'll speak to one of this year's winners. That's Sahrawi human rights leader Aminatou Haidar, who's led a decades-long peaceful campaign to resist the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara, often called Africa's last colony. Stay with us.
Idle as it seemed, trudging through the mist, following the creeks erasing dim lines on the list. Eager to arrive, leaving footprints in the clay. Reading rocks and blinds, telling indigo from grey. Telling indigo from grey. Scattered rays of light and dust grains in the air. Berries in the tree.
With the Ink of a Ghost by the Argentine-Swedish folk singer José González, singing last night at the Right Livelihood Awards ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden. To see the whole ceremony, you can go to democracynow.org. Yes, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from an open channel in Stockholm, Sweden, where Democracy Now! Broadcasts every weekday. But we turn now to one of the winners of this year's Right Livelihood Award, the Sahrawi human rights leader Aminatou Haidar. For over 3 decades, Haidar has led a peaceful campaign to resist the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara, often called Africa's last colony. Morocco has occupied Western Sahara, a small region just south of Morocco in northwest Africa, since 1975, in defiance of the United Nations and the international community. Thousands have been tortured, imprisoned, killed, and disappeared while resisting the occupation. Peaceful protesters led by women are routinely beaten in the streets. Despite this violent repression, Aminatou Haidar has led countless hunger strikes and demonstrations and unflinchingly documented the abuses against the Sahrawi people for more than 30 years. She's a former political prisoner who was jailed for 4 years in a secret prison. In granting her the award, the Right Livelihood Award Foundation cited her, quote, steadfast nonviolent action despite imprisonment and torture in pursuit of justice and self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. I sat down with Aminatou Haidar just before she won the Right Livelihood Award, and I began by asking her to explain what's happening in occupied Western Sahara.
Je dois leur faire connaître la situation.
I would want to let them know about the situation of my people, the Sahrawi people. It's a people that is separated, one under Moroccan occupation and the other one in Sahrawi camps. They live in difficult conditions. And I come from the occupied territory under Moroccan occupation. Western Sahara is an ex-colony, an ex-Spanish colony, the last colony in Africa. Since 1975, it is occupied by the Kingdom of Morocco. This has been a tragedy for us. It has led to a lot of suffering, deprivation of our rights, torture, disappearance, arbitrary detention, the deprivation of our social, economic, cultural, political rights. I have spent 4 years of my life bounded in a prison, a secret prison, without having had a trial, nothing. During that old period, I was cut from the outside world, no connection with my own family. But my case is not a unique one. It is similar to thousands, hundreds of my landmen and women in Western Sahara. It is a territory where international observers are not welcome. It is forbidden to them to have access to Western Sahara. When there are delegations of journalists, civil societies, parliamentarians, they are expelled from Western Sahara. 4 days ago, a parliamentarian delegation from the Basque countries in Spain couldn't get out of the plane, and they were expelled to the Canary Islands. But at the same time,
de cette répression.
We're talking about violation, about repressions, but we must also talk about our resistance, our determination. We are determined to continue our peaceful struggle to make sure that our rights to freedom and independence are fulfilled.
Aminatou, can you tell us your personal story? Where you were born, where you grew up, and then what happened to you?
I was born in the south of Morocco, in a country that, unfortunately, I have never seen up to today, because I grew up in Western Sahara, in the occupied territories. I grew up under bombs in a situation of war.
And then explain what happened to you, how you became active when you were first imprisoned.
When I was 15 years old, I started to understand that there was a war. I started to understand that my people was separated into two territories. I started to understand that a part of my family was in refugee camp, that they had to flee for their life. And from then on, a sense of suffering grew up in me. I wondered what I could do to help my people. And when I was 17, I really understood the situation. And I started to commit myself for the struggle for my people. At that time, it wasn't possible to be an activist publicly. So I was being discreet. I was hiding myself just like all my compatriots. I was studying in high school, and when I turned 20, a commission of the UN, of the African Organization, was going to visit Western Sahara. It was in 87, a referendum was to be organized, and me, together with other students, we took the decision to organize a big demonstration to make sure that our message would be heard, to make sure that our voices would be heard, to tell people that we were here in Western Sahara, that we wanted our freedom, that we were against Moroccan occupation, and also to help our parents, our brothers who had disappeared since 76. So before the arrival of this commission, the Moroccan government arbitrarily kidnapping, and I was a victim of this crime against humanity. I was 20 years old. And my eyes were bounded. I was in a secret prison, tortured. Imagine me during 4 years not seeing anything, being humiliated, psychological and physical torture, attempt of sexual violence, attempt against my life. I had no connection whatsoever to the outside world, no contact with my family, no sentences, no trial, nothing.
And so how ultimately were you freed?
En 1991,
in 91,
grâce à l'accord de paix,
thanks to the peace agreement that was signed by Morocco,
la puissance occupante,
the occupying power, and the Polisario Front, which is the represented from the Sahrawi people. So in that peace agreement, a ceasefire was included, and the liberation of political detainees and war prisoners, an exchange of prisoners. And thanks to that, I was liberated together with a group of Sahrawi, 324 people, and among them 74 women.
On revendique toujours le sort qui est inconnu de plus de 500
And we know
Sahrawis.
that more than 500 Sahrawi are still, we still don't know where they are. They are still the victims of disappearance.
So, Aminatou, how long have you been imprisoned? And was it for that one time, or were you picked up again?
Non, j'étais aussi de nouveau arrêtée.
I was detained again in 2005 and spent 7 months in a prison à Lyon because of my activities. Because once we were liberated,
nous étions sortis d'une petite prison.
We had left a small prison
pour être dans une grande
to find a big prison. An open sky prison in Western Sahara. So the police was after us. They would ask us about different questions. We couldn't travel abroad. And personally, I spent years without having traveling documents until 2005. And thanks to the intervention of the State Department, the American State Department, after the visit of an American delegation in Lyon, this delegation met me and other activists, and they learned that I didn't have any passports and that was the case of other Sahrawis. And they intervened, and a few months after that, Moroccan authorities gave me a travel document. But a month after that, they beat me in the middle of the street. They arrested me.
Et sur la base d'un dossier falsifié,
and on a wrong report with false accusations, false charges.
Le juge marocain a
the Moroccan judge ordered my arrest, and I was sent to prison, and I was on a trial with another group of human rights defenders, and that was after the Intifada was launched. The Intifada is a series of peaceful demonstration for the independence of the Sahrawi people. It was thanks to us, human rights defenders, that we succeeded to make the situation of the Sahrawi known, the situation of our occupation. We managed to make our voices heard, and Sahrawi left a situation of terror that Morocco had kept upon them during 10, 20 years, 30 years. It's thanks to us that Sahrawi follow a peaceful struggle. They know how to demand their rights without using violence. So we disturbed the Moroccan government, so we were arrested again because they wanted to scare other Sahrawi, and they wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be as many protests as there were at that time.
When we were in Western Sahara, when we were in Laayoune, we met activists like Sultana Khaya, who had her eye gouged out by Moroccan police. Mina Bali, who was beaten in a demonstration along with Sultana and others. Are women particularly targeted, and how are they dealt with? We had video of them being sexually abused in the street by the security forces.
Oui, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, mon cas n'est pas unique.
Yes, as I said earlier, my case is not unique. Sultana Khaya, a young Sahrawi woman, sacrificed one of her eye, and the only crime she committed was that she demanded the right of independence for her people. Same thing for Mina Bali. And today we have another woman, a young Sahrawi, who has 2 children, and she is imprisoned today. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison because she protested against a false trial against her cousin. Those Sahrawi women are victims of repression. They are courageous women. They are determined. We are an exception in the Arabic Muslim world because we are respected within our society. We are in the struggle. Nothing stops us. And the Sahrawi woman is seen as the spine of the Pacific resistance, the driving force of the struggle. She is and has been present in the struggle, in the occupied territories, in the refugee camps. And it has a lot of value.
Les pays occidentaux doivent prendre en
and Western countries must acknowledge this.
What are you demanding now?
Mais moi, j'interpelle.
I'm calling upon the international community that should apply international law. The United Nations should be coherent with their values, the reason why they were funded. The injustice against us happens because some international powers act with complicity. So my message is, let's put an end to our sufferings. Let's put an end to this injustice. Let's give a voice to Sahrawi people. Let them choose their future.
Mon message
and my message
est sérieux, c'est qu'il faut éviter le déclenchement d'une guerre.
Is that the situation is serious. We need to avoid war because young Sahrawi today do not believe in a peaceful struggle anymore. There are mines around them. There are terrorists all around them. We need to guarantee our rights. We are a people that deserves to be free. Because of our values, we are a courageous people, a determined people. We have conducted a peaceful struggle since the ceasefire. During 28 years now, we are a people that respects other religions. We are a tolerant people. We believe in coexistence. We believe in democracy, in equality between genders. We have a moderate form of Islam. I think that international law should be applied as soon as possible.
The UN Special Envoy to Western Sahara, Horst Kohler, quit his post in May. The UN has taken a step back clearly in resolving the conflicts. What prospects are there for a resolution?
Exactement. C'est ce qui me
Exactly.
préoccupe
That's why I'm concerned.
le plus.
That's what worries me most.
L'ex-envoyé personnel, le
The
président
former
a vraiment pu avancer les choses.
envoy, Hans Koller,
Et aussi,
made sure that things started to go forward, and that is also the case of the American ambassador, Stavros. They managed to make sure that negotiations went on, but they didn't get the support that was needed. They didn't have the support of the international community, the United States and France. France is our big problem because they blocked the peace process in Western Sahara.
Elle interdit l'élargissement du mandat de la
France doesn't want the MINURSO to get a greater mandate so that the MINURSO can monitor human rights.
J'urge vraiment les Nations Unies de
I
nommer
really
le plus vite
urge the
possible
United Nations to nominate as soon as possible another special envoy to start negotiations again to make sure that we find a peaceful solution.
The Polisario Front is holding its 15th Congress on December 21st, 19th through 21st, the first under its new president, Brahim Ghali. The leadership has accused Morocco of blocking a solution to the conflict and says it's reviewing the ceasefire that has been in effect, and that all options are on the table. Do you think there's the possibility the Polisario will pick up arms, return to war, and what would this mean?
Malheureusement, c'est très probable.
Unfortunately, it is quite possible. The Polisario Front is under the pressure of young generations, under the pressure
par les jeunes. Comme je viens de dire, qui ne croient plus à
young
la résistance
people who
pacifique.
do not believe to
Et c'est pour cela
a peaceful fight anymore, a peaceful struggle anymore. And that's
j'essaye de
the reason why
transmettre ce message, qu'il faut
I
prendre des
try to
mesures
say loud
pour
that measures should be
vraiment
taken
éviter
to
le déclenchement
avoid
d'une guerre.
a new war.
We're now in Sweden, which was poised to recognize the Sahrawian government until Morocco blocked the grand opening of the famous Swedish company IKEA. And then Sweden backed down. How unusual is this, and how does Morocco influence these kinds of decisions? What did that mean to you?
Oui, nous avons toujours aussi du soutien de la part du peuple suédois.
We've always been supported by the Swedish people and by the Swedish government.
L'attitude de suédoise est très avancée.
And the Swedish attitude is a friendly one, but I can't hide that I'm very disappointed, and all my compatriots are disappointed, because after the decision of the Swedish Parliament in 2012, a decision to recognize the Arab Sahrawi Democratic Republic, what happened? The Swedish government didn't adopt that decision of the parliament. It never recognized the Sahrawi Republic after pressures from Morocco.
Ces faits ont endommagé l'image de la Suède.
And that was detrimental to the image of Sweden.
Et vraiment, c'est malheureux de
It's a
voir
pity
un pays
to see a democratic country like Sweden
cède à la volonté de
giving away
l'occupant
to the pressure of an occupying power
aux dépens de la victime, qui sont les Sahraouis.
and not supporting the victim, the Sahrawi people,
Et qui n'a pas respecté
not caring about the law, not respecting the will of the Swedish people, because the parliament represents the voice of the Swedish people.
transmis comme message.
And that was my message today.
That's Right Livelihood laureate, Sahrawi human rights leader Aminatou Haidar. She was celebrated Wednesday night for her decades of resistance against the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara. Go to DemocracyNow.org to see our hour-long documentary, 4 Days in Occupied Western Sahara, Africa's Last Colony. When we come back, as Medicare for All and free college have become key issues of the U.S. 2020 presidential race, we'll look at Sweden's thriving welfare state. Stay with us.
It all starts somewhere. It all starts with one. Everything comes for something. It all starts with one. It all starts somewhere. It all starts with one. Nothing comes from nothing. It all starts with one. First everything is dry. Before the dew and the drops align, then the rain starts falling down. Then comes the flood. The flood. It's right, the flood. The flood.
That's Norwegian songwriter, vocalist, guitarist Anne Brun performing one at the Right Livelihood Awards ceremony Wednesday night here in Stockholm. To see all the performances and all the speeches of the Right Livelihood laureates, go to DemocracyNow.org. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Stockholm, Sweden, from the Open Channel. As Democratic presidential candidates debate Medicare for all and making public higher education free, we turn now to look at how Sweden has built one of the world's most extensive social welfare systems. Here in Sweden, healthcare costs are largely subsidized by the state. Daycare and preschool programs are mostly free. Higher education is free. Public transportation is subsidized for many users. To look at how Sweden does it, we're joined by Mikael Törnvall. He's a Swedish author and journalist focusing on economic issues at Svenska Dagbladet, a Stockholm daily. His most recent book is titled Who Should Pay for Welfare? Mikael, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. So we just have a few minutes here to explain a lot of issues that I think are very misunderstood in the United States. You've lived in the U.S., you live here in Sweden. Talk about Medicare for all. Talk about your healthcare system. How is it paid for?
So it's almost entirely paid for by taxes. And I know that scares a lot of you guys, but the thing is we pay, for me at least, I pay almost equivalent in healthcare taxes than you would pay via your employer for health insurance. But what I also get by that is that I don't have any co-payments to talk about. It's the maximum co-payment for healthcare in Sweden is a few $100s a year.
Okay, explain your own personal situation. What happened with your daughter?
Yeah, that happened a few years ago before we moved to the U.S. She got ill and she had a brain tumor, fortunately not a deadly one. She got operated on by one of the best surgeons in Europe.
How old was she?
She was 12. She got excellent care afterwards. We stayed as a family at the hospital with her for a week, and she then had follow-up care for several years. She had to go to a doctor every few months, and we paid nothing for that. Nothing. Because she's a child until 18. You don't pay anything for health care.
So then you come to the United States and you're shocked.
Yeah, and what happened there was she needed, for some reason, she needed to go to a hospital in an ambulance. And they asked, what healthcare company do you have? And since we are from Sweden, we had a very small one that wasn't covered, and I had to pay with a credit card to get her to the hospital.
So you're watching the presidential debates. Every corporate network journalist who hosts one of these debates, they usually ask a question about health care, and they say, are you going to raise taxes? Talk about how the Swedish people feel about this, because you're talking about an issue that unites people across the political spectrum in Sweden.
Yeah, nobody, not even the most conservative parties, would like to get rid of this system. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is that, or two misconceptions also in the US. One is that it costs us a lot of money in terms of taxes. Yes, it does. We pay way higher taxes in Sweden than in the US, but we have way lower expenses for co-payments for healthcare, health insurance, daycare, saving for children's college and so on. We don't need to bother about that. So the higher taxes for most people is more than offset by lower cost for other stuff.
So you say this makes Sweden far more competitive, while the U.S. says, no, this is much too expensive. You say it's too expensive not to do this.
I would say at least it would make a country more competitive to make sure that everybody who is smart enough has access to the best education, and everybody who needs healthcare gets that, because then they will be able to be part of the workforce instead of worrying about health. And you, as everybody else in the West, need to compete with better and better companies in China, in India, and the best way to do that is not with an unhealthy, undereducated population.
Well, talk about school. You have Bernie Sanders and some others talking about free college.
Yeah, we have free college, so we don't pay any tuition for any university in Sweden, even the best ones that could compete on a global level. You can't have any tuition, which means that everybody who has the grades to join these universities can do it. And they obviously then take jobs in our global companies and helps them compete on a global scale.
And talk about overall welfare, the issue, and what you think are the greatest misconceptions about Sweden.
Sometimes they describe Sweden as a paradise, that everything works perfectly in Sweden. It doesn't. You need to understand that everything doesn't work perfectly. But there is a difference. You don't need to worry too much about money. Everybody can send their kids to daycare because it's affordable. Nobody needs to worry, will I go bankrupt if I get sick? Because healthcare is almost free. And if you're smart enough and study hard enough in high school, you will be able to go to university.
And how do you answer questions here like, why should rich kids go to school for free?
That is a debate that is not easy. Some people would say that, why should they? But we decided, I guess, basically, it's the only way to make it simple. Everybody has access to the basic part of welfare as we see it, rather than checking your income, because that opens up for all kind of cheating.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Mikael Törnvall, Swedish author and journalist focusing on economic issues at Svenska Dagbladet, a Stockholm daily. And that does it for our show. If you want to see our 3 days of coverage from here in Stockholm, Sweden, go to DemocracyNow.org. Special thanks to Stockholm's Open Channel, Stockholm's only independent grassroots non-commercial TV station committed to free speech. The Öppna kanalen carries Democracy Now! 4 times per day. And we want to thank our crew here, Lars-Erik Niemann, who is the chair of the Open Channel, Larry Berger, Peter Carlson, Mia Högfeldt, Kent Wierstam, and Jakob Bjelvanstam. Special thanks to our Democracy Now! Team here in Stockholm, John Hamilton, Dennis Moynihan, Trina Nadura, Libby Rainey, Nermeen Sheikh, and back in New York, the whole team, including Ravi Karan and Hani Massoud. Tune in Friday as we begin our live coverage from Madrid, Spain, for the UN Climate Summit. We'll be there for the next week. Tune in to DemocracyNow.org. DemocracyNow.org is here because of all of you. We thank you so much. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us from Stockholm, Sweden.